Eli had always been a quiet person. His apartment, tucked away on the top floor of a nondescript building in the city, reflected that. It was simple and organized, just the way he liked it. He wasn't a fan of the noise or distractions of the world outside. All his focus was on his work, tech. He spent long hours coding, solving puzzles, and finding ways to break into systems most people thought were impenetrable. His genius lay in the fact that he saw things others didn't. Patterns, connections, hidden doors within the digital world. But that evening, as he sat hunched over his desk, staring at a screen filled with lines of code, the last thing he expected was for his door to swing open. It was a soft creak at first, like the wind pushing the door slightly ajar. Eli frowned, thinking it was probably the building's old hinges. But then the door opened fully. The soft glow from the hallway poured into the dark room. He turned his head, expecting to see one of the neighbors, maybe a delivery person. Instead, he saw her. She was tall, far taller than any woman he had ever seen. Her posture was confident, her steps purposeful as she moved into the room. She had sharp features, almost too perfect to be human. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, like she was made of something that wasn't quite of this world. She stopped a few feet from him, and Eli's breath caught in his throat. He was used to surprises. He'd seen plenty of strange things on his coding adventures, things most people would never understand. But this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Without a word, she reached up and unfastened the hood of her robe, letting the fabric fall to the floor in a smooth motion. What remained underneath was something even stranger. Her attire was not something anyone from Earth would recognize. It shimmered, almost like liquid metal flowing over her body in a way that seemed to change with every movement. Her eyes, though, were the most striking, deep, otherworldly, and glowing with a faint, almost hypnotic light. Eli blinked, trying to process what he was seeing, but his mind struggled to catch up. Was this a dream? A hallucination? Are you going to stare all night, or do I get your help? She said, her voice calm but commanding. Her words broke through the fog in his mind. He blinked again and stood up, unsure of what to say. Who
are you?
Her smile was subtle, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm Lyra, she said simply. And you're Eli, right? The one who solves the impossible. Eli took a step back, heart pounding. How did she know his name? He hadn't shared it with anyone outside his circle. He was careful about that. How do you know who I am? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's eyes narrowed, but there was no malice in her gaze. That doesn't matter right now, she said. What matters is that I need your help. She stepped closer, and her presence seemed to fill the room. Eli felt the strange pull of her energy, but he still couldn't make sense of the situation. His instincts told him to be cautious, but his curiosity was stronger. She was not human, he was sure of that. The way she moved, the way her clothes shimmered, the glow in her eyes, it was all too alien. I've come to you because you're the only one who can help me, she continued. You're the best at breaking things open. And this thing, she gestured to a small glowing orb that appeared in her hand, needs to be unlocked. Eli glanced at the orb. It was small, no bigger than a marble, but it pulsed with an odd rhythmic glow. Something about it made his fingers itch with the desire to understand it, to crack it open and find out what secrets it held. But his mind raced with questions. Unlock it? Eli repeated, his voice shaky. What is it? What does it do? Lyra stepped forward, her eyes still locked on his. That's what I need you to figure out, she said softly. And time is running out. Eli hesitated, still unsure of how to respond. He had worked on a lot of tech before, alien tech even, but this was different. This wasn't something you just stumbled upon. Whatever this was, it had purpose, and Lyra knew more about it than she was letting on. Why me? Eli asked. There are plenty of other tech experts in the world. Why did you come to me? Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the room as if assessing him, as if deciding how much to reveal. Because you see things differently, she said finally, and because you have a mind that can think in ways others can't. You're the key. Eli's mind spun. The key? What did that even mean? Listen, she continued, you don't have a choice. I'm not here to negotiate. You can help or you can refuse. But if you refuse, there will be consequences. I'm not here to make friends, Eli. I'm here to make sure this thing doesn't fall into the wrong hands. A cold shiver ran down Eli's spine. What are you talking about? Who else is after this? His voice had an edge of panic now, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Lyra's eyes softened just slightly. Let's just say there are people, powerful people, who would use this against humanity. They want to control it. They want to control what's inside. If they succeed, the balance of power in the galaxy will shift. Galaxy? Eli blinked in confusion. What does this have to do with the galaxy? Lyra took a deep breath, her posture shifting just slightly. Everything, she said simply. This orb is the key to an ancient alien weapon. But it's more than just a weapon. It's a doorway, a gateway, and if it opens, there will be nothing that can stop what comes through. Eli felt his stomach twist. This was getting out of his depth fast. A weapon, a doorway. He wasn't prepared for anything like this. I don't understand, he said, his voice quieter now. Why me? What can I do? Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, Eli saw a flicker of something human in her eyes. Because, she said slowly, you are the one who can unlock it. You are the one who will decide what happens next. Eli stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. There was a part of him, a small, quiet voice that wanted to run, but there was another part of him, one that was fascinated, curious, and already trying to figure out how to crack open the orb, to see what lay inside. Finally, he nodded, a mix of fear and excitement in his chest. All right, he said, his voice steady. I'll help you. But I need to know more. I need to understand what we're dealing with. Lyra's expression remained unreadable, but there was a brief flash of relief in her eyes. You'll understand soon enough, she said. For now, just know this. The fate of humanity is in your hands. Don't let me down. With that, she turned and walked towards the door, leaving Eli standing in the middle of his apartment, his mind reeling with questions. He wasn't sure what he had just agreed to, but he knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The following days felt like a blur for Eli. It had been less than 48 hours since Lyra first appeared in his apartment, and his world had already been turned upside down. He was no longer just a tech geek living a quiet life in his small apartment. He was part of something bigger, something he couldn't yet fully understand. He had agreed to help her with the orb, the mysterious alien artifact that seemed to hum with energy every time he held it. But every time he touched it, his thoughts felt clouded, as though his mind was trying to make sense of something far too complex for him to comprehend. It was clear that Lyra knew more than she was saying, and Eli didn't know whether he should trust her or be cautious. Lyra had been quiet for most of the time since their meeting, only occasionally offering a few cryptic pieces of information. She told him they were heading to a secure location to continue their work. At first, Eli assumed they would be heading to some underground lab or a government facility. But instead, Lyra led him to an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, a place that looked as if it had been untouched for decades. Why here? Eli asked as they entered the dimly lit hallway of the building, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Lyra's eyes scanned the surroundings. It's the only place safe enough to work without interruption. Trust me, we need privacy. They entered a large, dusty room at the far end of the building, filled with piles of old furniture, abandoned equipment, and a small table in the center. Atop the table lay the orb, resting on a piece of cloth as if waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. Eli approached it cautiously, his hands hovering above it. Despite his initial excitement, a lingering sense of dread gnawed at him. There was something about the orb, something deep and ancient that seemed to beckon him, like a puzzle his mind was desperate to solve. It doesn't look like much, Eli muttered, his fingers brushing lightly over its surface. Appearances can be deceiving, Lyra replied from behind him. The orb is far more than it seems. What's inside is the key to understanding everything, about the galaxy, about humanity's future. Eli felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. Everything? Was it really that important? He shook his head, trying to clear his mind. Okay, so what's the plan? How do we get this thing to work? Lyra's gaze softened, but there was still a sharpness in her eyes. We need to decode it. It's locked in a language, an ancient language no one on Earth has ever seen before. But I know a way to break through it. You just need to help me open the pathway. Eli glanced at her, confused. How do I help? You said I could unlock it, but I don't know any ancient languages. Lyra smiled faintly. It's not a language in the way you think. It's more like a code. A series of patterns and signals that your brain can interpret. Once you break the initial layer, the rest will fall into place. Think of it like solving a puzzle. Eli frowned. A puzzle. He'd solved his fair share of difficult ones before, but this felt different. Still, there was something about Lyra's calm demeanor that made him want to trust her, even though his instincts were screaming to be cautious. He took a deep breath and moved closer to the orb, staring at the faint glow pulsing through it. He reached out and with trembling hands placed his fingers on the cool surface. The moment his skin touched it, he felt a strange sensation, a spark of energy running through his fingertips, up his arm, and into his chest. His heart raced. "What the—" Eli gasped, pulling his hand back. Lyra was already beside him, her eyes narrowed as she observed him closely. "It's reacting to you," she said, her voice low. "That's a good sign. Now focus." Eli swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He reached back out and placed his hand on the orb again. This time the energy didn't scare him. Instead, it felt familiar, almost like it was guiding him. His fingers moved across the surface, tracing lines that seemed to appear and disappear beneath his touch, like they were waiting for him to uncover them. Slowly, the patterns started to make sense. It wasn't a language, but a set of symbols and algorithms, something like an encryption. Eli's mind clicked into gear, his focus sharpening. He had solved plenty of puzzles before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a matter of cracking a code. It was like he was connecting to something greater, a knowledge that didn't belong on Earth. As he worked, Lyra stood back, her eyes never leaving him. He could feel her watching, but there was no pressure, just a quiet confidence that pushed him to do his best. Minutes turned into hours as Eli worked tirelessly, running his fingers over the orb's surface, connecting the dots in his mind. His mind raced, piecing together the puzzle, the pattern slowly becoming clearer. But just as he thought he was getting close, a strange noise filled the room, a low, rumbling hum that seemed to come from the very walls. Eli looked up, startled. "What is that?" Lyra's face hardened. "We're not alone." Before Eli could respond, the door to the room flew open with a loud crash. Figures dressed in dark military-style uniforms poured into the room, their weapons aimed directly at Eli and Lyra. There were at least a dozen of them, all wearing visors that hid their faces. Eli's heart sank. "Who are these people?" Lyra didn't flinch. "Government agents," she said, her voice calm. "I knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up with us. They won't stop until they get their hands on the orb." One of the agents, a tall man with dark eyes, stepped forward. "You need to come with us," he said, his voice cold. "Now." Eli's hands tightened around the orb, his mind racing. These people were after the artifact. They couldn't have it. He couldn't let them have it. "No," Lyra said firmly, stepping in front of Eli. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." The agent scoffed. "We understand perfectly. We know what that thing is, and we'll take it now." Before Eli could react, Lyra raised her hand. The orb in Eli's grip pulsed brightly, and with a sudden burst of energy, the room seemed to warp around them. A wave of force pushed the agents back, sending them flying into the walls. Eli's heart raced as the power of the artifact seemed to grow stronger in his hands. "What the—" Eli gasped, barely able to keep his grip on the orb. Lyra turned to him. "It's reacting to you. You're unlocking its power. But this is only the beginning." The agents struggled to get back to their feet, but they were stunned. The energy from the orb was overwhelming. It wasn't just an artifact, it was a weapon, a tool with immense power. "Power that could change everything. We need to go," Lyra said, grabbing Eli's arm. "Now." Eli hesitated, looking back at the agents who were now regrouping. He knew they didn't stand a chance against them. Not yet. But something inside him urged him to trust Lyra. She was right. This was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. As they sprinted towards the back exit of the building, Eli's mind raced. The artifact was more than just a key. It was a force in itself. And now it had chosen him. The questions that had been swirling in his mind only grew louder. Who were these agents? What exactly was this artifact? And why had Lyra brought him into all of this? One thing was clear. Eli's life would never be the same again. The adrenaline from the escape didn't fade as Eli and Lyra raced through the dark streets of the city. Their footsteps echoed in the empty alleyways as they dodged behind buildings and through narrow passageways. The noise of their pursuers, those government agents, was growing distant, but Eli knew they couldn't stop now. They had to get away. Lyra had warned him that things would only get worse from here, and as much as Eli tried to ignore the fear creeping into his chest, he couldn't. Every step they took felt like it brought them closer to an unknown danger, something far more powerful than either of them could have imagined. They reached a small, unmarked van parked at the end of a dark alley. Lyra didn't hesitate. She slid into the driver's seat and Eli scrambled in beside her. The van's engine roared to life and they sped off into the night. Eli glanced out the window, his mind still racing with questions. "Where are we going?" he asked, trying to catch his breath. Lyra's eyes were focused on the road ahead, her expression tense. "We need to get to a secure location. We can't keep running forever. We need answers." Eli nodded, but the more he thought about it, the more questions popped up in his mind. What was that? The way the orb reacted earlier, it was like it was alive. Lyra's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but she didn't look at him. The orb is alive, in a way. It's not just a simple object. It's part of something much bigger. The energy inside it is tied to an ancient civilization that existed long before humanity ever rose. Eli's mind spun. Ancient civilization? How old are we talking? Thousands of years. The civilization that created the orb was far more advanced than anything we can imagine. But the reason it's so dangerous is because it has the power to awaken a force much older, a force that can change the balance of the entire galaxy. Eli's chest tightened as he tried to make sense of her words. "You said the orb is a key. A key to what?" Lyra took a deep breath before speaking again. "The key to unlocking a galactic consciousness. The knowledge of that ancient civilization is contained inside the orb. But it's not just knowledge. It's power. If the wrong people get their hands on it, they could control everything." Eli stared at the glowing orb resting in his lap, its pulse steady and constant. It didn't feel dangerous in his hands, but Lyra's warning echoed in his mind. If what she said was true, then the power he was holding could destroy worlds or save them. "We need to figure out how to use it," Eli said quietly. "If this is really the key to something that powerful, we have to make sure it's not used against us." Lyra's expression softened slightly, but there was a darkness in her eyes. "I know, that's why I brought you into this, Eli. You're the only one who can unlock the rest of the code. You're the only one who can understand what's inside, and we don't have much time." Eli glanced at the orb again, trying to ignore the growing anxiety in his chest. The more he learned, the more dangerous it seemed. But he couldn't turn back now. He had already crossed a line. He had no choice but to follow this path, no matter where it led. The van drove for hours, crossing through the city and heading into the outskirts. Eventually, they reached an isolated location, a remote underground facility hidden beneath a nondescript warehouse. Lyra parked the van and led Eli down a narrow stairway that descended deep into the earth. The air inside the facility was cold and dry. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as they walked through the long hallways, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty space. The facility felt abandoned, yet there were signs of recent activity. Empty crates, old equipment, and dusty computers. "This is where we'll finish the work," Lyra said, her voice low. "The final code is here." Eli followed her into a large room at the end of the hallway. It was filled with ancient technology, machines and monitors that looked nothing like anything he had ever seen. They were like relics from a forgotten time, their designs sleek and strange, as if they had been built by a civilization far beyond Earth's current technology. In the center of the room there was a large pedestal. Lyra motioned for Eli to place the orb on it. Eli hesitated, his fingers curling around the orb. "What happens when we do this?" he asked. "Once the orb is placed on the pedestal, it will begin to synchronize with the facility's systems. It will unlock the final layer of the code. But you must be ready, Eli. Once we open the gateway, there will be no turning back." Eli took a deep breath. His hands were shaking slightly as he walked toward the pedestal. He could feel the orb growing warmer in his grip, its pulse quickening as he placed it down. As soon as it touched the surface of the pedestal, a low hum filled the room. The walls around them lit up, and strange symbols began to appear on the monitors. Eli's heart raced as he watched the symbols slowly shift, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. It was happening. The code was unlocking. But then, something went wrong. The room suddenly trembled and a sharp, high-pitched sound filled the air. The symbols on the monitors flickered, then scrambled. Eli stepped back, alarmed. "What's happening?" Lyra's eyes widened. It's activating faster than I expected. This is beyond what I prepared for. The orb began to glow brighter, its light flooding the room. The floor beneath them shook violently as a beam of energy shot up from the pedestal, shooting toward the ceiling. The walls rattled, and Eli could hear something. Something deep and ancient stirring within the very foundation of the facility. "No," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with fear. "It's too soon. We need to stop it." But it was too late. The energy from the orb had triggered something far more powerful than either of them could control. The floor cracked open and a large, glowing doorway appeared in the center of the room. It was a portal, just as Lyra had warned. A gateway to something beyond their world. Eli stared at the portal, his mind racing. This was it. The thing that could change everything. And they had just unleashed it. "What's coming through?" Eli asked, his voice barely audible. Lyra was silent for a moment before she turned to him, her expression serious. "I don't know, but we need to prepare for anything." As the portal flickered and pulsed with energy, Eli felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The world around them was shifting, and he wasn't sure they were ready for what was about to emerge. The air was thick with tension as Eli and Lyra stood at the edge of the glowing portal. The energy pouring from the orb had created a rip in the fabric of space, and through it, a shimmering gateway opened to an unknown realm. It pulsed with light, and the very air around them seemed to hum with the power radiating from it. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that everything they had done until now was just the beginning of something far bigger, something beyond their control. Eli felt a chill run down his spine as he glanced at Lyra. Her face was pale, her expression hard to read. "What now?" Eli asked, his voice tight with fear and uncertainty. Lyra's eyes were fixed on the swirling portal. "We wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever comes through that portal, we need to be ready. We've opened the gateway and now there's no going back." The portal flickered again and the humming sound grew louder, more intense. Eli's heart thudded in his chest and his grip on the orb tightened instinctively. The room around them trembled, as if the very foundations of the building were shaking. "What if we can't control it?" Eli asked. "What if we've made a mistake?" Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "I don't know, but we have no choice now. The artifact has already linked with the portal. We either face what comes through or we risk it taking everything. Our world, our future." Eli swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He had always thought of himself as someone who could solve any problem with a bit of logic, but this was different. This wasn't a code or a puzzle. This was life or death. The portal flashed brighter and Eli stumbled backward as a deep, rumbling sound filled the air. The light from the portal expanded, casting strange shadows across the walls. Lyra stepped forward, her hand raised as if to protect them both. "What is that?" Eli gasped, his eyes wide as he saw movement coming through the portal. Figures began to appear, shapes not quite human, not quite anything he recognized. They seemed to form out of the light itself, like shadows taking solid form. Lyra's voice was steady, but there was a hint of urgency in her tone. "These are the Guardians. They're the protectors of the knowledge the orb contains, but they're not here to be friendly. They've been waiting for someone to unlock the gateway, and now they're here to test us." Eli's mind raced. Guardians? He had no idea what to expect, but the figures that were emerging from the portal didn't look like anything he had ever seen. They were tall and imposing, with glowing eyes and bodies made of light and energy. Their forms shifted as if they were constantly changing, flickering in and out of focus. One of them stepped forward, its voice booming through the room. It spoke in a language that Eli couldn't understand, but Lyra's reaction was all he needed to see. "Eli," she said urgently, "we need to prove ourselves. If we don't, they will destroy everything we've worked for." The figure raised its hand and the air crackled with energy. Eli's heart skipped a beat. Whatever was about to happen, it was beyond anything he could have imagined. "Prove ourselves?" Eli repeated, his voice strained. "How are we supposed to do that?" Lyra stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the Guardians. "We need to show them we're worthy of the knowledge they protect. We need to prove that humanity can control the power of the artifact. Only then will they allow us to access the true power of the orb." Eli glanced at her, confusion clouding his thoughts. "And if we fail?" Lyra's face hardened. "If we fail, we lose everything. They will not hesitate to destroy us. Before Eli could respond, the first guardian raised its hand again. The energy in the room surged, and a blast of light shot toward them. Lyra instinctively raised her own hands, and a shimmering barrier of light appeared in front of them, blocking the attack. The force of the impact knocked them both backward, and Eli felt the floor shake beneath him. "Get up," Lyra shouted, pulling Eli to his feet. "We have to fight back." Eli's heart was racing as he watched the Guardians advance, their movements slow but purposeful. They were closing in on them, their eyes glowing brighter with every step. Eli knew they couldn't just hide and wait for the Guardians to attack. They had to fight, but how? The orb pulsed in his hands, and a strange thought suddenly crossed Eli's mind. Could he use the orb? He had been holding it this entire time, but he hadn't understood its true potential. Maybe, just maybe, it could help them now. He reached out, holding the orb up toward the Guardians. The moment his fingers touched it, a surge of energy shot through him and the orb flared to life. The energy expanded outward, sending a shockwave through the room. Eli staggered, barely able to keep his balance, but the Guardians stopped in their tracks. The light from the orb wrapped around him like a protective shield, and the Guardians recoiled, as if the energy was too much for them to handle. The air was filled with a strange humming sound, almost like a song. The energy from the orb seemed to resonate with the Guardians, and they were no longer advancing. Instead, they were holding their ground, staring at Eli with intense, glowing eyes. Lyra watched him, astonished. "It's working," she said in disbelief. "You're controlling it." Eli felt his confidence growing, but it was quickly replaced with uncertainty. He had no idea what was happening, only that the orb seemed to be reacting to his will. The Guardians were waiting for him to do something, but what? "Eli," Lyra urged, her voice sharp. "You need to focus. You have to unlock the final layer. You have to prove humanity can wield this power." Eli nodded, taking a deep breath. He raised the orb higher, focusing all his thoughts on the energy flowing through him. The Guardians were still watching, but he knew they were waiting for him to show them he was in control. The orb glowed brighter, its light almost blinding. Eli's body hummed with energy as the symbols that had been hidden inside the orb began to shift and change. The final code was opening, and he could feel the power within it. The Guardians stood still, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for him to unlock the secret. With one final push, Eli concentrated all his energy on the orb. A blinding flash of light erupted from the artifact, and the room seemed to collapse around him. The Guardians' forms began to flicker, their glowing eyes dimming. Then silence. Eli stood breathing heavily, the orb still in his hands. The Guardians had vanished, their forms dissipating into the air like mist. The portal was still open, but now it was no longer a threat. The Guardians had retreated, acknowledging that humanity had passed their test. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes wide. "You did it, Eli. You unlocked the final layer." Eli looked down at the orb in his hands, feeling the weight of what he had just done. The power that had been contained within it was now unlocked, but it wasn't just a weapon. It was a key to something greater, a future that Eli wasn't sure he fully understood. "What now?" Eli asked, his voice low. Lyra's eyes softened. "Now humanity can move forward. We've unlocked the knowledge and power of the ancients. We've proven we can control it. The galaxy has been watching us, and now we can shape our own destiny." Eli nodded slowly, his heart still racing from the events that had just unfolded. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had just taken its first step into a much larger world.